Well, let's get stuck into this topic now, and I'm joined by the Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control, Robert Bates. Rob, welcome to the show. So as Keir Starmer has been to Germany to see Olaf Scholz, he's been to France to see Emmanuel Macron. Now he's gone for a little Rome to see Giorgia Meloni. Will anything come of this? Because here's my problem with this, Rob Bates. Italy have got to grips with illegal migration to their shores because they sent millions of euros to Libya and Tunisia. Their coast guards turn boats back. They do the opposite of the French, who give them an escort to our shores. With that in mind, it's a completely and utterly different model. So you're not telling me that Keir Starmer is going to start paying the French to tow back to France. That's what we all want, but it ain't going to happen, is it?
No, and this whole trip is a complete gimmick. It's done purely for the optics of Starmer, seen to be taking a hard line on the migration crisis that his government is now presiding over. You're absolutely right to point out that the Italians, since Meloni came in, have been very competent at clamping down on those crossing the Mediterranean into their country. However, the problem that Britain faces isn't the Italian border being usurped by those crossing from Tunisia. The problem is that those that have entered Europe and are then coming to the UK. And let's not forget that the central Mediterranean route, the one that Italy have seen a 60% reduction in those entering over the last few years, is actually only a tiny proportion of those coming into Europe. We have the Eastern Mediterranean route, which is one of the huge routes, hundreds of thousands coming in that route each year. We have Eastern Europe and we have the Western Med as well. And ultimately, we can throw as much money as we want at the Italians. We can give as much money as we want to Tunisia, but the flows will continue to Britain so long as the pull factors that are currently in place remain in place. And the Labour Party seem to be completely oblivious to this fact. They've removed any semblance of a deterrent, and they are ultimately laying out a red carpet for those that are now entering our country. We're seeing increasingly likelihood that social housing will be offered to those that are seeking asylum and those that are ultimately given asylum. We obviously have a very generous benefit system for those that are granted asylum. And then we also have an incredibly generous family reunion route for those that are granted asylum as well. So long as these factors remain in play, Britain will continue to be one of the soft touches of Europe.
OK, Rob Bates, Sir Keir Starmer was certainly talking tough earlier on the topic of migration in Italy. Let's have a little listen to what he said.
The challenge of irregular migration. This is a problem across Europe for both of our countries in particular, but across Europe. As Director of Public Prosecutions in Britain some years ago, I saw the important work that can be done across borders on issues like counter-terrorism. And I've never accepted, as we discussed, that we can't do the same with smuggling gangs. And now, of course, Italy has shown that we can. You've made remarkable progress working with countries along migration routes as equals to address the drivers of migration at source and to tackle the gangs. And as a result, irregular arrivals to Italy by sea are down 60% since 2022. So I'm pleased that we're deepening our cooperation here.
So, Rob Bates, just to hammer home this point, you know, of course it works for the Italians to stop sea arrivals from their nearest problem countries, Libya, Tunisia, because they turn the boats back. As you pointed out, the problems we have, it's not, by the way, irregular migration, it's now called illegal migration, we're going to call it. It's Afghanistan, it's Iran, it's Turkey, it's Iraq, it's Eritrea. That is coming across continental Europe via land, not via sea. It becomes a seaborne problem when the beaches of Calais become involved. And so if Sir Keir Starmer is serious about replicating anything approaching the Italian model, it means turning boats back to France. Rob Bates, I'll be able to flap my arms and get to the moon before that happens.
You will be, and you're quite right. It's hardly irregular migration at this point when we've had 140,000 cross in the last few years. The Labour Party's plans, as I said, have completely missed the problem that Britain faces. We aren't a country on the Mediterranean. We aren't a country with a land border with Turkey. So our problem ultimately stems from those that are entering Europe in the first place. And ultimately, what Italy's plan has done, and it has been effective for their own country, but Europe as a whole continues to face these huge problems of people entering via different routes, a whole host of different routes. And ultimately a large proportion of them are flooding to Britain, and Britain is the prize, if you like, of breaking into Europe. And we are the primary destination that a lot of these migrants would choose to head towards. And ultimately, without a deterrent plan, without a deportation plan in place, we are not going to have the sheer strength in the and these migrants aren't going to see us as a kind of country which is prepared to grapple with this in any semblance of the route. And it's absolutely heartbreaking to see European countries across the continent. Germany, for instance, have just introduced border controls. They're all starting to have proper national conversations. We've just got a prime minister that's going around on jollies to European capitals and having a nice day out, effectively.
Even though there's a feeling of Groundhog Day about this, we've seen Sir Keir Starmer in Germany try and do a deal. Well, Germany just closed its borders. We've seen Sir Keir Starmer in France cozying up to Macron, but the French still keep escorting dinghies to our shores. Meanwhile, in Italy won because they did deals with Libya. They did deals with Tunisia. They basically towed boats back to Africa if they were trying to get to their shores. So Keir Starmer could learn a lot from that. But David Hay, you know full well there's very, very little appetite for anything approaching that to be done by Sir Keir Starmer's government.
Well, good afternoon, Martin. I think you're right. Certainly Groundhog Day also, because if you remember, we saw Rishi Sunak with the Italian leader a few months back in summer. So, we need to see Keir Starmer doing a lot more than talking tough and being seen with leaders that are seen as tough on immigration. We need to see that. And I just don't see that we're doing that at the moment. What we're also not seeing is a lot of the details. So I think, it's a very, very difficult job to tackle the gangs and to stop illegal immigration, not irregular immigration, as it now seems to have been rebranded. And that's going to take a long time and a lot of work, and we're not there yet.
And the deal with Libya and the deal with Tunisia, that, by the way, Ursula von der Leyen of the European Union joined forces with Giorgia Meloni. They're basically giving over 100 million euros to each of those African nations to allow them to beef up their coast guard, to beef up containment facilities in Africa. So sending out the clear message, David Hay, if you get on a boat and you try and get across the Med and you try and get into Italy, you will be intercepted and you will be returned. QED, light bulb moment, guess what? 60% decline in the arrivals to Italy. Turning back the boats works, but do you think, to repeat my question, is there any way, in terms of the human rights legislation, David Hay, that such a deal could even be possible with France? Because that's where our illegal immigrants are coming from.
I think, we're bound by the same as all the other countries in Europe that are part of the ECHR. We're bound by the same rules as they are. That's the first thing to look at. Now, some countries, obey the findings and the rules of the ECHR more than others. So I think, and that will be one of the interesting things with the Albania deal that Italy is looking at, because obviously if that goes forward and people are sent there, and there may or may not be legal challenges in the ECHR, that might be something that Starmer then looks at doing. Obviously, it's very different to Rwanda potentially. But I think, unless and until all the countries work together to tackle this, that it isn't going to be resolved. But then at the same time, each of those individual countries have their own self-interest, because illegal immigrants are going to go somewhere. If people are looking for a better life, they're always going to try. So there's also going to become a bit of competition, I think, between the countries, because they're not going to one country because its borders are tough, they're not letting them in. They may well look at another. And so you're going to have, I think, a growing problem there as well.